Good morning and welcome to Victory is Mine with Pastor Andy Stump of Victory Christian Center in Carthage, Missouri. Start your day with a powerful message of hope, faith, and victory in Jesus Christ. Here's Pastor Andy, bringing you encouragement straight from God's Word.
Good morning. We're in Romans chapter 10, and I'm going to start with verse 1 this morning. It says, "Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for the Israelites is that they may be saved. For I can testify about them that they are zealous for God, but their zeal is not based on knowledge, since they did not know the righteousness that comes from God and sought to establish their own. They did not submit to God's righteousness. Christ is the end of the law, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes." And here we see in this chapter the continuation of Paul's thought that this new covenant is based on the fact that God both declares men righteous and gives his righteousness to those who believe in the gospel. And we see this even more specifically stated here in verse 3, that not only does God declare us righteous, and not only does he make us righteous, but he gives us his righteousness. And this was the problem with the Jewish people then, according to what Paul's saying here. They did not submit to God's righteousness, but sought to establish their own through their own obedience to the law. And he expresses once again his desire to see his people come to saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. He commends them for being zealous, but goes on to say that zeal is not the only thing needful. You must have knowledge to base that zeal off of. It does not matter how zealous you are. If your zeal is based on the wrong things or the wrong set of facts, then it's going to end up badly. It's not going to have good results, or at least results that meet God's standard. So the results might look very good. They might be better than anybody else has ever done them. They might be perfectly fine to all who can see them through their own eyes. But if it doesn't meet God's standard, then it falls short of the goal of righteousness. So Paul's conclusion in verse 4 is basically implied that since no one can come up to God's standard or results of righteousness in and of themselves, based on what they do, based on obedience to the law, they cannot come up to God's righteousness. And so God's righteousness can only be distributed by faith. And in that way, since it's based on faith and distributed by faith, there is righteousness for everyone, not just for those who have the proper law and observe and obey that law. In verse 5, Paul goes on to say, Moses describes in this way the righteousness that is by the law. The man who does these things will live by them. Well, that's a problem, because while that might sound straightforward and seem fairly simple to adhere to, we've got a whole Old Testament that shows it's not as easy as it sounds. If your living or dying hinges on whether or not you can keep the law, then that's a scary proposition because of what Paul said in Romans 8:3. The law was powerless to do for us what we needed because the flesh weakened any power or any ability for the law to help us. So Paul begins to contrast again the law versus the righteousness that comes by faith. On the one hand, you have what Moses says about the law and righteousness that comes from the law. On the other hand, in verse 6, you have the righteousness that is by faith. And the righteousness that's by faith says something. It opens its mouth and it says something. It says, verse 6, "Do not say in your heart, 'Who will ascend into heaven?' That is to bring Christ down. Or, 'Who will ascend into the deep?' That is to bring Christ up from the dead." Here, Paul is referencing human effort again. Don't think you've got to go up into heaven and beg God or beg Jesus to come down to you. And don't think you have to cry and pound the pavement begging Jesus to be raised from the dead for you. For one thing, that's already happened. And it happened without any assistance from you or from me. Paul is removing every vestige of your ability or your effort to bring about righteousness. That righteousness is God's righteousness, not yours. You didn't come up with it. And as we'll see in this passage, that the way you receive it is by faith in what Jesus has done for you in his death and his resurrection.
Thank you for joining us on Victory is Mine. If you're looking for a church home, we'd love to welcome you to Victory Christian Center in Carthage, Missouri at 13996 Burr Oak Road. Join us this Sunday at 10 a.m. or 5:30 p.m. and experience God's love, power, and victory in your life. You can also learn more about us at vccchurch.org. Have a blessed day.